Hello everyone, welcome to the Python Object and Data Structure Basics class. And in this lecture, we are going to be covering the basics of data structure when it comes to Python. Sorry, data type, I mean. So we're going to cover the basics of data type when it comes to Python and different data types that we have when we are also using our Python programming language. All right, so let me go ahead to share my screen so that you can see what I have for you all. All right, so first we are going to comment by, so let me go ahead to do this for one of the, all right. All right, so we're going to start by talking about Python object and data structure basics. Good morning. I hope you all are doing well. All right, so ba- the thing we're going to cover in this lecture is basic data types, right? So we're going to be covering the basics of the basic data type that we have in Python. I know over the past few classes you've done introduction to data types, and that was for Excel class. So in this class, we are going to be talking about basic data type in Python. All right. So in this section of the course, we are going to um, can you please kindly confirm if the audio is audible? All right. So in this section of this course, we are going to cover the key data types in Python, right? And basically, these are the basic building blocks when you are constructing larger piece of code, right? So when you start writing larger piece of code in Python, this will be the basic things that you would always go back to over and over again, right? You're going to be working with different data types when it comes to Python programming language. And let's quickly discuss all of the possible data types that we are going to use for this lecture, and we are going to go into more details about each one. All right. So next is these are the basic data types we're going to be covering, which is integers. We are going to cover floating point. We are going to cover strings, list, dictionary, tuples, sets, and booleans, right? So basically, this is the overview of the data types we're going to cover, and we are going to go into we're going to go into each of these data types, right? Explaining each and every one of them, and also we're going to do code examples, all right? So first, let's go ahead to talk about integers, right? So what are integers? Basically, integers are just whole numbers, right? So when you're talking about whole numbers, when it comes to mathematics, like 3, 2, 300, 200. So in Python programming language, when you hear something that is called integer, right? So just know that it's a whole number, right? So integers are whole numbers, right? And after I'm done explaining this, we are also going to go into our notebook to explain each of these ones together, all right? So next is floating point, right? And basically the type of floating point is always represented as float when it comes to Python programming language, all right? So basically when you hear float in programming language, what it means is it just means that is a number with a decimal point, right? So you might have worked with decimal points before when it comes to mathematics, like 2.3, 4.6, 100.0, right? So any number that has a decimal in it is always referred to a float, right? And in some other programming languages too, they refer to it as double, right? But in Python programming language, it's mostly referred to as floating numbers. So the next one that we also have is strings, right? So for string, basically they are just ordered sequence of characters, right? For example, we can have hello, right? We can have Sami, we can have 2000, and we can have this Chinese language that we have right here, all right? But basically, what you need to know is all of these strings are always represented in a double quote or in a single quote, right? And once we go ahead to do this basic example using our Python code, you are going to see all of this, all right? So next is after strings, we also have lists, right? So basically, lists are ordered sequence of objects, right? For example, we have 10, we have hello, we have 200.3. So what you are seeing here is whenever you want to represent a list data type, it's always inside a square bracket, right? You can see it's always inside the square brackets. And basically, you can have different types of data type inside the string. For example, you can have string inside this list, right? So you can see this is a string here. You can have integer number, which is 10 here, and you can have floating point number, which is 200.3 when it comes to list in Python. All right. So basically, lists are just ordered sequence of objects when it comes to Python programming language. All right. Please let me know if you guys can hear me very well. If you can hear me very well, kindly drop it in the comment section. All right. So the next data that we're going to be going through is dictionary, right? And don't worry, I'm just giving you an overview of the data types we're going to cover. We are also going to go ahead to do code examples of each of every one of them one by one. All right, as we move on with the class. So we also have dictionaries, and dictionary is always represented as dict when it comes to Python. When you check the type of dictionary, you're going to see something like dict, and you're going to see that when we start our Python coding exercise, right? So they are basically unordered key value pairs, right? And basically they're always represented inside this curly brace, right? So inside this curly brace, you're going to have something that is called key, right? The key and the value, all right? So the key is always in either single quote or double quotes, and you use this semicolon to assign it to the value, right? So this is the key here, and this is the value. And you can have different multiple keys and value inside dictionary. For example, you can see we have one here, the key and the value, and we also have the next one, name and Frankie, which is the key here is going to be name and the value is going to be Frankie, right? And next is we also have tuples, right? So basically, tuples are ordered immutable sequence of objects, right? So when they say something is immutable, that means you cannot modify it, all right? So, and here we have 10, hello, 200.3, and basically they are always inside parentheses, all right? So now, the major difference between lists and tuples is for lists you can basically um modify whatever you want to do. Yes, for example, you can add to this list to this list here. You can remove this 200, you can add more numbers, you can add you can remove. That's basically what you can do with lists, all right? But when it comes to tuples, they are basically immutable, right? You can't modify them, all right? So the next one is sets, right? So sets are unordered collection of unique objects, right? So basically, when you have a set data type, all of the values inside that set must be unique, all right? And lastly, we also have booleans. And booleans is basically a true or false value, right? So for example, you can have a is equals to a is equals to true, b is equals to false, and so on and so forth, right? So they are basically boolean values, true or false. So, all right, so now that we've seen the overview of all these data types that we have, now let's go ahead to explore numbers, all right? So basically, what are numbers? So they are two main numbers type we are going to work with, right? And these are the two major popular numbers types that are used in Python programming, right? And the first one is integer, right? And integers are basically whole number, like I explained before. And also we also have floating point numbers, which are basically decimal numbers, right? So whole number is going to be like 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. And when it comes to floating point number, they are going to be like 2.3, 3.5, right? So basically they are those whole numbers that have decimal points in them, all right? So now let's explore the basic maths with Python, right? So we're going to do some basic mathematical operations together with Python so that we can understand how numbers work very well. And after that, we are also going to discuss how to create variables and assign them values, right? So if you don't know what variables are, just make sure you stick with me with the lecture. We are going to cover what variables are and basically how you can assign them values and how you can do those cool stuff when it comes to Python programming language. All right. So currently I'm in my screen right now. So what you can do is you can head over to your documents, right? Documents, and go to the Python folder that we created in our previous class. So Python tutorial course. That's where I'm in currently. And basically you have to open your Anaconda first. So when you open your Anaconda, just click on Launch Jupyter Notebook and the command line would pop up, right? So once it pop up, it's going to redirect you to your browser. And when you come to your browser, just navigate to the documents, then Python tutorial course folder that you created, right? You might name yours differently, right? So you can just navigate to it. All right. So what I added here is just this logo, and also I created a new folder called Python Object and Data Structure. And basically, this is where we are going to be um, this is where all the code regarding um, Python object and data structures are going to be created in. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead to create a new file, Python file. And here, basically what we're going to be doing is we are going to be talking about numbers. All right. So I can rename this to 00 and I'll name these numbers. Right. So I'm going to name these numbers. So here we are going to be talking about Python numbers and basically everything you need to know about Python numbers. All right. So what I'm going to do here is going to go ahead to copy this. All right. So let's get them. All right. So now let's go ahead to start with Python numbers, right? So basically, what are we going to cover when it comes to Python numbers? We are going to cover differences when it comes to Python numbers, actually. So the first thing we're going to cover is we're going to look at the type of numbers we have in Python, right? So after we've looked at the type of numbers that we have in Python, um, we're also going to look at the basic arithmetic operation that we can use in Python. So those basic operations that you use when it comes to Python programming language, right? Plus, minus, division, multiplication. We are going to look at all of that, right? So after we've looked at that, we're going to learn about the difference between classic division and floor division also, right? So this is what we're going to cover, right? And the last thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at object assignment in Python. All right. Object assignment in Python, right? And basically, when it comes to Python programming language, they are basically different, various types of number that we have, right? Like I mentioned earlier in our previous slide, that we have the floating point number and the whole number, right? And basically, you don't need to worry too much because I'm going to be giving you guys all the notes that you need here as we go along with the course. So let me just go ahead to zoom in here for you guys so you can see this very well, right? And now I'm just going to paste the notes for you guys here, right? So you don't need to worry about typing everything. It's going to be provided, so you can check the link in the description below. There's going to be a link to the class notes. Once we are done with this class, it's going to be updated to the GitHub repo, so you can actually have a copy of what we are also working on here, right? So you can see that here, Python has various types of numbers, right? We have the numerical literals, and basically, we are going to focus mainly on integers and floating point number, like I said earlier, all right? So integers are just whole number, and examples are like one, two. You can have a negative number also, like I mentioned before, and floating point numbers to decimal point numbers, and you can also have something that is called like exponential, if you've heard of it before. When you're talking about something like 2 raised to the power 3, 3 raised to the power 2, right? So all of that also are also floating point numbers, right? So basically throughout this course we're going to focus on integers and floating point numbers. And this is a table that also displays the some of the examples that we'll be working with. All right, so you can see here that we have 1, 2 minus 5, 1000, right? It's basically an integer. And also you can see here that we have this one 1.2 minus 0.5 and 2 exponential 2, right? So that's 2 to the power of 10, like I mentioned here also in the slide for you guys. And also we have floating point numbers, right? And this is what we're going to cover, right? So now that I've seen this, let's look at some basic arithmetic, right? So some basic arithmetic operators, right? So number one, we can actually have an addition. And basically, when it comes to addition, you can have something like 2 plus 1, right? So basically, once you are running your Python code cell here, so let me just go ahead to create one new cell here, so you guys can see this very well, all right? So if I do 2 plus 1, right, what is going to happen is Python is going to basically execute this cell, right? So once it executes this cell for us, and we are going to get our output displayed below, right? So if I say 2 plus 1 and I click enter, so I'm going to run this from here, right? The shortcut is you can see control enter, right? And that's what I'm going to be using. But for now, I'm just going to be showing you guys how to do it manually, right? So if I run this cell, you can see that here I have 3, right? So basically you can do those simple um arithmetic operations that you usually do in your mathematics, right? So I can also have something like subtraction also, All right, so I can have subtraction, and when it comes to subtraction, I can say something like 5 minus 3. All right, so if I say 5 minus 3, you can see that here we're going to have 2. Right, and normally when we are doing 5 minus 3 in Python, it's the same thing we're going to have here. All right, so likewise also we can also do something like multiplication. Right, we can also have multiplication. Right, so basically, if you see that I'm using this hashtag here, I'm just using to explain what I'm doing below for you guys. It's called comments, and we are also going to cover what comments are in our upcoming lectures. All right, so you can also do multiplications here, and when you are doing multiplication, you have to write 6, right? Then you see an asterisk sign on your keyboard, which is basically once you press Shift 8, you should have the times, right? So I can say 6 times 2, and basically we should get 12, right? So you can do multiplication, and another thing that you can also do is you can do division, right? So those basic arithmetic operations that you do in mathematics, you can actually do them here, right? So I can say division, right? So once you see this hashtag here, just know that it's a comment that I'm using to explain what I'm doing in that particular cell, right? So I can say division also, and I can say 3 divided by 2, which is 1.5. So we should get the output here, right? So you can see that we have the output here. So let me create more cell, B, to create more cell below. And let me just show you guys, we have something to what which is called floor division, right? So we have floor division. And what is floor division? Now, you can have something like 7, and I'm going to use the backslash 2 times 1, 2, right? So the backslash 2 times 1, 2, then 4, right? So if I say 7 floor division of 4, then we are going to get 1, right? But basically, the last time I checked, if we actually do 4, 7 divided by 4, right? You can see that we have 1.75, right? But basically, what it does is when you use floor division, Python just take the first whole number that comes that gets returned, right? And it disregard whatever we have in the decimal points, right? So basically, the reason is because when you are using floor division, right, the operator actually removes whatever divisions whatever decimal you have at the side, right? So it truncates all of that away, right? And it returns only the integer result. So that's what floor division is, right? So you need to know that once you are using floor division, basically it goes ahead to truncate. So let me just paste it out for you guys. Once I use a floor division, it goes ahead to truncate whatever integer, whatever decimal point you have there, and it returns the value. So that's why in this particular place, we are getting 1, all right? But if we do 7 divided by 4, normally we are supposed to get 1.75, all right? So another data type that we have here also is known as the modular operator, right? It's known as modular operator. And what is modular operator? When you hear about modular operator, it means that you should take in the remainder, right? So for example, if I'm saying um 3 divided by 2, right? So 3 divided by 2, normally you should know that that's 1 remainder 1, right? So the modular operator goes ahead to take the remainder only, right? It's just like how you use modular operator normally in mathematics, right? So if I say 5 divided by 6, right? So that's 5 divided by 6. How many 6 can you see in 5? That's 0. 0 remainder what? Remainder the 5. So 5 modulo 6 is going to return what? 5. All right. So let's do some basic example together. So here I can say, for example, I can say 3 modulo 2. And once I do 3 modulo 2, you see we're going to get 1. Now, why are we getting 1? Right? So let me just write this down for you guys here. So we're getting 1 is because if I say we can only write C, so you can so if I say sorry, we're gonna get so 2, so like basically how many, so I can say what's the remainder. Okay, let me write this. It returns the remainder. right? So basically, it returns the remainder of the division when you run this particular code, right? So be all right. So basically, what happens is when you do modulus, right? 3 modulus 2, how many 2 can you see in 3, right? So that's 1, remainder 1, all right? So another example is we can also do something like 6 modulo 3, right? So now, how many 3 can you see in 6, right? How many 3 can you see in 6? We can see what? 2, remainder what? 0, right? So 6 divided by 3 is what? 2. And do you have any remainder? No. So it's going to return what? 0 for us, all right? So let's do another quick example here is I can say 5 modulo 6, right? So if I'm saying 5 modulo 6, I'm saying how many 6 can I say in 5, right? Which is what? 0. And the remainder is going to be what? 5, all right? So it's going to return what? Sorry, 5 modulo 6, I wrote and. So it's going to return what? 5, all right? So now, why is it returning 5? Because sometimes when you're working with modulo, it's going to be quite tricky. So just know that when you're working with modulus, you have to take the number that is beneath. So for example, 5 divided by 6, right? So if I say 5 modulo 6, it means 5 divided by 6, right? So how many 6 can I see in 5? That's 0, right? And basically it will be 0, remember what? The 5 that we have left. So that's how modulo work. So quick one for you guys, for a quick question for you guys. If I say um 7, right? Modulo, if I say 7 modulo 9, what is going to be the output? I want you guys to tell me in the comment section, right? So if I say 7 modulo 5, what is going to be my output, right? I'm going to wait for you guys to drop the answer while we proceed with our lecture, all right? So basically, let's continue our arithmetic operations, right? All right. So let's continue our arithmetic operations. These are the basic arithmetic operations that we have. We've talked about the types of numbers in Python. We've talked about basic arithmetic operations, right? And we've talked about difference between classic and floor division, all right? And that's what we basically discussed here. So now let's go ahead to talk into let's continue our arithmetic operations, which is performing more operations in Python basically, right? So we also have something that is called powers, right? Right, so powers. So what is powers, right? So basically, okay, so somebody is saying 7, right? So 7 modulo 9, Emmanuel is saying is going to return 7. So let's run this together. And Emmanuel is right, 7, right? So that's 7 divided by 9, which is how many 9 can we say in 7? That's 0. Remember what? Remember that's 7. All right, so that's how modulus work. Emmanuel, well done. So now let's talk about powers in Python. So how you do your normal mathematics when it comes to powers, where you are going to be saying something like 2 raised to the power 2 or 3 raised to the power 2. You can actually do all of that also in Python, right? And how can we do that in Python? So what you are going to do is you're just going to say, if you want to say 2 raised to the power 2, for example, you're going to say 2, and you're going to use double asterisks, right? So 2 raised to the power 2, this is how it's going to be written in Python, and you're going to get 4, right? So you can see, once I say 2 raised to the power 2, we're going to get 4, right? So I can also say the square root of 2, right? So you can also do roots this way. So you can do roots, right? And how can we do roots? We can also say 4 raised to the power what? 0.5. Right? I know 0.5 means 1 over 2, right? So we're going to get what? 2.0. That's another way we can also do roots in Python, right? And basically, when you're also doing operations, what you can do is you can use parentheses to also structure the way you want your code to be executed, right? So you can use parentheses. So parentheses just means brackets, right? Can use parentheses, right, to specify, right, the orders that you want your code to be executed in, right? So for example, mm, I can say into brackets 2 plus 10, right, into brackets times 10 plus 3, right? So if I don't just want to write 2 plus 10 times 10 plus 3 without putting parentheses, right? Basically, Python also executes your um, arithmetic operations using the BODMAS operators also, right? So, but if you want to be more specific, what you can do is you can say 2 plus 10 into parentheses. So Python is going to do the parentheses first, do the next parentheses, and also gives you the output, right? So if I run this, we should be getting 1526, right? Because if we do 2 plus 10, that's 12, and 10 plus 3, that's 13. So if you do 13 times 12, you should get 156, all right? So now that we've looked at that, let's quickly look at variable assignments, all right? All right, so let's look at variable assignments. So now that we've seen how numbers work, let's look at how we can actually assign names to variables, right? Because everything we're doing here, we are just writing we're just writing the operations right here, right? So let's look at how we can actually go ahead to assign variables and create our data also, all right? So what we can do is we can use a single equal sign to assign labels to variables, right? And let's quickly take a look at some few examples on how we can do this. All right. So for example, if I want to um create, so I can say I want to create an object, right, called a right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to then assign it, right, the number 3, right? So now when I'm saying creating an object, I'm also saying talking about creating a variable, right? And we are also going to talk about variable assignment also in details, right? So for example, I can say a is equals to 5, right? So basically what I'm saying here is I'm saying in this a variable that I'm creating, right? Whenever you see a, then assign it to be equals to 5, right? So if I run this cell, so I'm going to create more cell here, right? So if I run this cell and I say A, for example, and I click enter also. And don't forget, if you want to run the cell, come here to click run, but I'm using shift enter for shortcuts, right? So shift enter, and you can see I'm getting 5. Now, why am I getting 5? Basically, I'm getting 5 because I said whenever you see this object A, assign the value 5 to it. All right, so assign the value 5. So now if I call a, it's going to give me what? 5. Now this is how you assign variables in Python, and we are also going to look at variables in more details, right? The rules for naming variables and other rules when it comes to variable assignment also in Python. So I'm just showing you a quick example of how we can do this. All right, now basically when I call, so let me just write it here for you guys. So calling my variable, right? So this is where you can actually call your variable and it's going to give you the output, right? But what you can do now is you can actually go ahead to perform operations based on these variables that you've created, all right? So for example, I can say a plus a, right? So if I say a plus a, basically I'm saying 5 plus 5, and it's going to give me the output, right, which is 10, right? I hope you guys are following me. All right. So now that we have this, we can also check what the value a is now, right? So check what the value a is, and you see that we're still going to have 5, right? Because basically what we did here is we just added these numbers together, right? A plus a. All right. But what happens now? So let's look at this thing together. So now what happens if we reassign another value to the same variable, right? What is going to happen? What is going to happen, right? So basically, once we reassign another value to the same variable, what is going to happen is Python is going to go ahead to actually modify your variable to that new data that you assigned it to, right? So for example, if I say now that my a is equals to 10, right? And now I run a, Now Python is going to disregard this one that you did here before, right? So now my a is not going to be 5 again. Now my a is now going to be what? 10. All right. So my a now is now going to be 10, and basically that's what happens, right, when you reassign. So let me just write here for you guys. So reassignment, right? Reassignment, right? So once you reassign the variable, and here we can also check it out. So once you check it, right, you see that. So let me just copy this for you guys here, right? So once you check it, you're going to see that it's going to modify the variable to the new data that we assigned it to. All right. Basically, this is all you need to know about numbers, and basically we're going to cover it very well in detailed. I'm going to cover it very well when we start um in our next lecture actually. All right. So but basically, before we start our next lecture, let's go ahead to do a quick exercise, right? So for example, if I say I want to write a simple program, so a write a simple uh, program to calculate tax, right? So I can say, for example, I can say I have something that is called um my income. So just follow what I'm doing here, right? So later in the next lecture, we are going to look at the rules for naming variable, which we're going to look at after this particular lecture now. All right. So I can say, for example, my income is equals to 100. So let's say I'm collecting $100 per hour, right? And I'm supposed to pay a tax of what? Of 10%, right? So what is 10%? That's 0.1. I hope we all know that, right? So I can say the tax rate is equals to what? 0.1, right? And what I can do here is, after saying my tax rate, I can now go ahead to calculate my tax. So I would say my tax, right, will be equals to what? My income. So now what I'm doing here is I'm now referring to this variable. Instead of me typing 100 directly, I'm now saying my income, right, times the what? Tax rate, right? Tax rates. So you can also use tab to autocomplete, like how we do in our command line, right? So tab to autocomplete the variable name, all right? So now what I'm doing is I'm creating a new variable that says, okay, my tax I'm going to be paying is what? My income, which is 100, right, times tax rates, which is what? 10%, 0.1, all right? And basically, I can go ahead to run this cell, right? So if I run this cell, nothing is going to happen, right? Because we are not displaying any value, right? But if you want to show my tax, right? So if I want to show my tax now, I can just say my tax, right? And it's going to go ahead to print out the result of this my tax here. So I should be getting 10 naira, all right? Sorry, $10, whatever it is, right? So basically, this is how you can actually perform operations, perform number operations using variable. All right. So now that we've heard about variables and we know a little bit about variables, that variables are basically used to store data, right? For example, I'm storing this 10 data. Here I also stored my income data, which is 100. Next year I also stored my tax rate, which is 0.1, and I also stored my income, which is what's my tax, which is my income times the tax rate, which I got 10, right? So basically, we already know that we can actually use variables to do all of this. All right. So now that we've seen how we can use variables, please kindly confirm if you guys can hear me very well in the comment section so that I can know you guys are following me. All right. So now that we already looked at what variables are, let's go ahead to understand. Let's go ahead to look at it in depth now, because they are basically rules that you need to follow when you are naming your variables, right? So when it comes to variables in Python, they're basically rules that you should look out for. What you should, the do's and don'ts that you shouldn't, that you should take note of, the pros and cons when it comes to variables naming. All right. So that's the next thing that we are also going to be look at. Okay, you guys can hear me very well. Very good. All right. So now I'm going to come back home here. So basically, I'm just showing you guys how I'm actually creating these files. In our upcoming lectures, I'm not going to be going in depth on creating files and folder again. I'm just going to be showing you the folders I've created, all right? But I want us to do this together first, so you're going to understand how I'm creating the Python notebook, all right, for our class. So yeah, I'm going to come here, all right? So I'm going to click on new Python notebook, all right? And for this Python notebook, I'm going to name the Python notebook um, O1, right? So I'm going to name it O1. I'm going to name it variables, right? So variable assignment, all right? So now, basically, what is a variable? When it comes to Python programming language, when you hear something that is called variables, what do we mean by variables, right? We've looked at a quick example that a variable is actually used to store data, right, in our computer's memory, right? But when it comes to Python programming language, you should know that variables, so proper definition is variables are basically used to store data temporarily in a computer memory, right? That's one thing that you should take note of, all right? So for example, if you want to store a number, if you want to store a string, your name, for example, your a list of numbers also, basically we are going to use variables for all of that, all right? So but before we start writing our code, let's take a look at what variables assignments are, right? So variable assignments, so we already saw how to work with numbers, right? But what do these numbers represent, right? For example, I can just go ahead to be performing arithmetic operations over and over again, but basically all of those data are not stored somewhere, right? So basically, it would be nice if we can assign these data types a variable name to easily reference them later on in our code. All right, trust me, if they aren't variables in Python, there's no how we are going to be referencing our code over and over again, right? So if we actually want to reference our code later on, it will be very, very nice if you can store them inside a variable name. All right, so now for example, I can have something like my dogs is equals to 2, right? So what I'm saying here is this my dog variable value that is here, assign this data 2 to it. So whenever I print out my dogs, I'm supposed to get what? 2 here. All right. So next is there are actually rules for naming these variables, right? So you can't just wake up one day and just say you want to name your variables like anything that you like, right? But there are certain rules that you have to follow, right? Trust me, you can assign multiple variable names to your applications, right? But there are certain rules that you must always follow to in order not to have error when you're writing Python programming language, right? And this variable rules also applies for different programming languages also. So if you can understand the rules for naming variable in Python, when you are working with other programming languages also, it should be good to go. All right. So the first rules for naming variable is a variable name cannot start with a number. So when you are naming your variable, you must not start with a number, right? And basically, for example, if you want to name your variable, you cannot say two two numbers is equals to 5, right? So you must not start with number, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. You cannot start your variable name with a number. If not, you're going to have error. All right. So the next one is there must not be space when you are naming your variable, right? So instead of space, you can use something that is called the underscore, right? So this underscore that is here, so instead of you saying my space name is equals to Daveworld, you can use my underscore name is equals to Daveworld, right? So there must not be space when you are naming your variable. All right. So the next one is you can't use any of these symbols, right? And basically all these are called special characters, right? So when it comes to Python variable name, you can't use special characters when it comes to Python variables, right? So for example, you can't say dollar $5 is equals to 200, right? So that dollar sign basically. So you can't use any special characters. And when I mean special characters, I mean times, plus, multiplication, division, brackets, whatsoever it is, right? You must not use special characters when naming your variable. All right. So the next thing is it's considered best practice, which is PEP 8, that variables are in lowercase throughout. All right. So basically, when you are naming variables, it is preferable, right? So there's a best practice that is called PEP 8, and basically what it's just saying is you should try to name your variable in lowercase. All right. Um, there are also different naming convention, which is we have Pascal naming convention and all of that. But as we go along with the course, I'm going to explain that to you guys. So you don't need to worry too much about that, right? So just know that it's considered best practice to always use lowercase when it comes to your variable assignment. All right. So the next is you need to avoid using words that have special meaning in Python, right? So, for example, if you are trying to name your variable, you must try your best. You must try your best to actually not use whatever name that has been given to Python, right? So whatever keyword that Python uses already. For example, you already know that in Python we have list, we have int, which is for integer. So there are other keywords, and as we go along with it with Python course, you're going to know and understand more keywords that we have in Python. Right? We have if, we have elif, we have else, we have for, and so on and so forth, right? So basically, try your possible best not to use any of these variables name of this keyword when you are using your variable name. All right, so that's one thing to take note of. And next is Python uses dynamic typing, right? Basically, what that means is you can reassign variables to different data types. So for example, if I say um, a is equals to 5 in my first line of code, in my other line of code, I can have something like I can change my value of I can say a is equals to Daveworld, right? So I can reassign values to variables. That's what I mean by Python uses dynamic typing. All right. So next is it actually makes Python very flexible in assigning data types. And basically, that is also one of the major difference when it comes to other programming language, right? Other programming language are basically statically typed, right? So like C sharp, C++, right? Those programming language, once you assign a particular variable, a particular value to it, like if you say, okay, for example, my variable a, you're going to say like int a is equals to 5. So in other programming language, what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, okay, my variable a is going to be an integer, right? And you have to assign the value 5 to that integer. That's what it's basically saying, right? So that is what we call statically typed programming languages, right? But Python is basically dynamic type. So you can have a variable name, a variable that is an integer before, and you can change it from an integer value to a string value, right? That's what they mean by Python is actually dynamic types, right? So you can actually reassign different variable data type to a particular variable that you've named before. All right. So next is, for example, I can have my dog is equals to 2, right? And later on, I can change it that my dog to be equals to. Now you can see that this particular type is a what? Is an integer, right? So now next is I can say my dogs is equals to Sammy and Frankie. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically saying that I'm changing my dog value from 2 to this particular value, which is Sammy and Frankie. And this is actually okay in Python. You can do this. All right. But um basically, if you try to do this in other programming languages like C, TypeScript, and all of that, basically you're going to get error in other programming languages, right? So different programming language have their own syntax. So you should always make sure to understand each programming language syntax before you go into them. But for Python, you can actually do this, all right? And basically, if I say int my dog is equals to 1, right? And next I'm saying my dog is equals to Sammy, like I mentioned earlier on. When I'm saying int my dog is equals to 1, I'm saying my dog value is going to be an integer number. But if I now go ahead to go and reassign it to a string, right, it's going to got result in error. And this is example of a static typing in C++. All right. So pros of dynamic typing, right? So first is it's very easy to work with, right? Especially when you know that you can, instead of you creating different variables, you can go ahead to reassign variables over and over again, right? So it's very easy to work with, and it's very faster when it comes to development time, right? So faster development time, you can basically change variable names from numbers to list and so on and so forth, right? But basically the cons is it may actually result in bugs for unexpected data types, right? So for example, if you are asking a user to enter his name, right? So you can say maybe name is equals to user input, enter your name, right? And the user is entering 1, right? So you already know that that's an error because we are expecting a string, but the user is inputting an integer, right? So basically, it can actually result in bugs for unexpected types. And basically, there's something that is called type into brackets, all right? So, and basically, what this does is in Python, it basically tells you that this particular variable that you're assigning, this is an integer. This other one, this is a float. This next one, this is a list. This is a dictionary, right? So that's what this type for you in Python does, right? So this type tells you type, the data type of that particular variable name that you are actually using. All right. So if you are following me, kindly drop a yes in the comment section so we can proceed. All right. So now let's explore some of these concepts that we just spoke about, right? So we've already talked about the rules for naming variables and basically the things that you need to do also. The things that you need to consider when you're naming variables is must start with a number, no special case, no space in it, avoid using Python keywords, and it's preferable to use underscore instead of using space when you're naming your variable. All right. So now let's go ahead to look at some of these concepts, right? When it comes to um variable assignment, right? All right. So like I discussed earlier, um there are rules for naming variables, and let me just drop the rules here for you guys, right? Such as the rules for naming variable that I mentioned in our previous slide. And now let's go ahead to explore um dynamic, right, typing, right? So let's explore dynamic typing, right? Remember I said dynamic typing basically means that you can reassign variables to different data types, right? And basically it makes Python very flexible when it comes to um variable assignment, right? So basically to it allows you to actually reassign values over and over again in Python, and it basically it makes Python very flexible to use. So let's look at an example that we did in our previous slide, right? So in our previous slide, I said we can have something like my dogs is equals to 2. So now you can see that I'm using underscore instead of space, right? If I try to use space, you can see that it's going to result in an error, right? Because it's saying invalid syntax. Python does not recognize this. So instead of space, I must use what? Underscore. Right, so now if I go ahead to print out my dogs, right, now I'm going to have what? 2. All right, because that's the value that I assigned it to. Now let's go ahead to reassign the value like we did in our slide, right? So I can say, let's go ahead to reassign. Let's go ahead to reassign. So I can say, for example, my dogs is equals to inside this quote, and I can say Sammy, right? And I can also say Jojo, or let me use frankly as we use in our slide, right? So I click enter, and I go ahead to run my dogs now. All right, so now you can see that my values is now what? Sammy and Frankie, right? So that's one thing you should take note of, that you can go ahead to reassign variables however you like, but basically there are pros and cons to this, like I mentioned in our previous slide, right? So what are the pros and cons when it comes to assigning reassigning variables, right? First, very easy to work with, faster development time, like I mentioned earlier on. But next is it may result in unexpected bugs, and you need to be aware of the type, right? For example, if I want to check the type of these my dogs, I can say type into parentheses and paste it here, my dog. So now what is going to return is it's going to return the type of my dogs that we currently have, that the value is currently assigned to. So in this case, it's going to be what? It's going to be what? A list, right? Because we've changed the value from a number, from an integer number to a list, right? So we talked about this before, when we are explaining types of data type. We have list also, but we are going to go more in depth into list, but this is just a basic example of how you can actually assign list to a variable. All right, so now let's talk about assigning variables now. Let's talk about assigning variables, right? So basically, when you want to assign variables, skip so when you want to assign variables, right, what you do is you have the name followed by the object, right? And where a single equals to sign means an assignment operator. And we are going to go in depth into as operators in Python programming language. But just know that when you are using the equals to sign, it means that you are assigning a an object to a variable name, right? Just like how you do in mathematics, x is equals to 2, y is equals to 3, right? So that's how you do also in Python. So for example here, if I want to create a variable name like we did in our previous lecture on numbers, I can say a is equals to what? 5, right? And if I say a, right, we now know that our a is equals to 5, right? And basically, you can also reassign variable, and you can say a is equals to a plus 5. Now, what am I doing here? What I'm saying is, I'm saying that my a is equals to a, which is what? My a is what? 5. So 5 plus 5, right? So if I run this and I print out a now, my a is equals to be what? 10. Because we've already added 5, which is what we have in our a before, plus this value 5. Now our new value for a is what? 10. And if I check the type of what a, you will see that it's what? An integer, right? An integer. Very good. Now, basically, there are actually shortcuts for this in Python, right? So when it comes to addition, subtraction, multiplication, and all of that, there are actually shortcuts in Python. And we are going to actually go in depth into this, but let me quickly give you an overview, right? So for example, I can actually use this shortcut plus equals to, minus equals to, and times equals to when it comes to assigning variables also, right? So let's check what our a value is now. We know that our a is 10. And now if I say a plus equals to 10, right? What does it mean? Now, this means that I'm saying my a is equals to what? A plus 10. That's what I'm saying here, basically. It's the same thing, right? So if I run this, what is going to be my output? I want you guys to drop it in the comment section. All right. If I run a plus equals to 10, what is going to be my output? All right. So while I wait for you guys to give me the answer, let's go ahead to try out other examples also. So I can say I have b is equals to 3. And if I say b plus equals to 2, then I'm going to get what? B equals to, okay, I did not run this cell, so let me run this cell. B is equals to 3, then b plus equals to 2. Then if I print out b, you see I'm going to have what? 5. All right. So I can see in the comment section, let me see if I have the output yet. All right. So if I say a plus equals to 10, what I'm basically saying is I'm saying a is equals to a plus 10. And we know that our a is 10, so I'm saying a is equals to 10 plus 10, right? So if I run this and I basically print out my a, see I'm going to have what? 20, right? So why is it 20? I'm saying that my A here is 10. You can see A is 10. And now I'm saying A plus equals to 10, which basically means A is equals to A plus 10. So A first is 10. So I'm saying my new A value will be what? 10 plus 10. That's why I'm getting 20 here, not 15, Emmanuel, right? So next thing that we're going to cover is we are going to look at how we can actually determine a type of variable. Now, we've looked at it quickly, right? But let me just give you guys an overview of how you can actually know the type of variable that you're actually working with, right? So you can actually do that using the word type like we used here before, right? So what you can do is you can actually check type of object that is assigned to a variable using Python built-in type function, right? And the common data types include what we discussed in our previous slide, which is integer, float, string, list, tuple, dictionary, set, and booleans, right? So these are the common um, data types that we currently have, right? So if I say um, my GPA is equals to 5.0 and I run this cell, shift enter, and I go ahead to say my type of what? GPA, and I run this, you see we're going to have float, all right? So you can also do different examples, like I can say my salary, right? Salary is equals to let's say $30,000, right? And I say my type is equals to type of salary, like what type of salary that we have. So tab, you can use tab to complete, don't forget, right? And I click close my parenthesis and I run enter. You can see that it's saying int, right? So basically, this is how you can actually do you can check the types of variable that you have that you are assigned that you've assigned, and you can do more you can explore more examples on this, right? So you can check for floats, you can check for string, and I want you guys to actually go ahead to do that, right? So go ahead to check, create an example, assign a variable name that it's dictionary, that is set, that is boolean, and check the type and see if you're going to get the true type of that variable that you assigned, right? If you want a detailed example of a variable name that you want to use or the value that you want to use, you can check the previous slide. I give you example, so you can just use that. If it's dictionary, you can use curly braces. If it's set, you can use parentheses. If it's list, you can use square brackets. All right. So basically, let me just show you guys something before we end the video today, right? So I know I'll be mentioning square bracket and all of that, but let me tell you guys the difference, right? So we have something like this, right? So this is called so let me put this as markdown. So this is called parentheses, right? So when I'm saying parentheses, just know I'm talking about this bracket that is here, all right? So now we also have square brackets. Now this is what? Square brackets, right? Now after the square brackets, we also have coily brace, right? This is coily brace. It's called as coily brace, right? Right, coily brace. And lastly, we also have something that's called angular brackets. This is as a greater than and less than. All right. So basically, once you hear me saying any of these particular brackets or parentheses, you should know what I'm talking about now. All right. So parentheses is this 1 year, square bracket is this 1 year, and curly brace is this 1 year. The angular bracket is this 1 year. All right. So mostly parentheses is always used when it comes to printing, when it comes to functions in Python. Right. You can see, for example, we're using parentheses here. Right. When it comes to square brackets, that's when you're using list mostly. And for example, we did an example of list here, right? So this is a list, for example. And curly brace is always used for dictionaries, right? This greater than less than mostly is always used for logical operations when you want to do is A greater than B or is B greater than A and all of that, right? So basically, that will be the end of today's lecture. Today's lecture, we've been able to we've been introduced to the basic data types that we have in Python, and also we also spoke about different types of numbers in Python. We looked at examples using integer, we looked at floating point numbers, and so on and so forth. And also, we also move ahead to talk about variables in Python, the rules for naming variables, do's and don'ts that you have to look out for when you're naming variables. And we also did some examples and also how we can check the type of variable that we are currently using or that we currently assigned in our program. All right. So that will be all for this lecture. In our upcoming lecture, we are going to dive deeper into other data types that we have, strings, lists, and so on and so forth. So I hope you guys enjoyed this lecture. If you do, please do well to give it a like. Um, Also share with your friends and comment. If you have any questions regarding this particular course that we just finished, all right. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.